There have been times that I have really wanted to try light novels of certain manga titles that I've read, but with this one, as soon as I finished reading this series and wrote a review on Goodreads, I was going to get the light novels and put them in my Right Stuff cart because I needed to know what was going to happen next in this series. Hello friends, happy Friday. So very excited that you're here. If you remember, I think it was roughly 2-3 weeks ago at this point, I did a poll asking you guys, should I review A Galaxy Next Door or should I review the title or the series that I am actually going to be reviewing today? And since this is a long one, I'm going to read what it says directly, and that is The Most Heretical Last Boss Queen from Villainess to Savior. Yes, so it was The Galaxy Next Door versus this series. This series didn't win at the time, but I was like, well, I'm still gonna review it, and here we are today. Oh my goodness, this series, I'm so excited for this review. I am so excited for this review. It's gonna be non-spoiler, of course, but I feel like I just have so many things I want to talk about with this series because it may not be my favorite villainous isekai, but it is one of the best villainous isekai stories I have ever read, or at least up to this date. Now, in case if you're not familiar with this story, because I feel like it's super underrated, I know there's an anime coming out. I don't know if it's this year, if it's going to be next year, but I know it's going to be on High Dive because it's going to be an exclusive. And I'm like, well, I got to make sure I have High Dive at that time because yes, I must read this series. But again, if you're not familiar with this series is about this young woman here. She is 8 years old and her name is Pride. She was a Japanese teenager who got hit by a car and ended up being reincarnated into this otome game. And behold, she is reincarnated as the Villainess, but this Villainess is basically going to destroy everything. She's going to ruin the lives of the people around her, and not just them, but her entire kingdom. Pride here is like, well, I know what's going to happen, and since I have these boss cheats, or yeah, I think that's what she calls them, is boss cheats, last boss powers, and she does say boss cheats in the manga, but she's like, since I have this, I'm going to do everything I can to not avoid the bad ending, yes, but she's like, I'm gonna do everything I can to save everyone around me. This series was so good. It's emotional. I never expected to tear up at multiple parts through all 3 volumes. I think I teared up the most in volume 1. But let's talk about why I feel like this is one of the best villainous isekais, because that's a pretty strong statement. We know that this genre or niche has been extremely popular and it's getting more and more popular. It's definitely one of my favorite genres. I just cannot tire of it. I know a lot of people are like, oh, isekai, like I'm tired of this. Give me a villainous isekai, and I don't care how similar it is to like 4 other ones I've read, I still want to read it because I feel like there's always something unique about that specific series. With this series, okay, first, I feel like typically with the villainous isekai, you have the heroine who gets reincarnated, and there's usually 2 different routes they go down. You have the first route, or the first way, so to speak, where the new heroine, or the heroine of the story, she has a lot of sympathy and compassion for this villainess because this villainess has just been misunderstood. They have had abuse that was towards them or at them, and so the heroine sort of wants to change that and give this new persona to this villainess because she ultimately is not really a villainess, she was just misunderstood. The other path or route, or however you want to call it, is that you have this villainess who is like, wow, I know the bad ending, I know that I'm going to die in this game because of how I played the actual otome game, and I'm going to do everything to avoid that death, or those red flags. This series very much falls into the latter, not ladder, like a ladder going up to a house. Anyway, but yes, this story very much falls into the second category, or the second route, where Pride here knows that her ending ends in death, and rightfully so for the original otome character, or otome villainess. We will talk about that at a later time. But anyway, yes, so she knows, but the thing is, what makes this unique, rather than her feeling afraid for herself and wanting to avoid the bad ending specifically for her, she wants to avoid the bad ending for all the people around her. Time and time again, you see Pride's desperation, you see her fear, you see her longing to use her powers to help these people. She does not want her kingdom to fall to despair and misery because of her actions. It's interesting because she tells at least 2 different people, people. She's like, if you ever look at me and you feel that I am going to bring despair to our people right now, or that you see an enemy in me, take my life. Do not let me live, because I want to do everything I can to keep the people I care for safe and that they are happy. That is what I felt made this different, is she doesn't care about herself. Numerous times we see that over and over, that she genuinely doesn't. I think she specifically says, I wish that their kindness was not wasted on someone like me, because she gets these flashbacks of who the Pride was before, and she's just so afraid where she'll make that action again. And she does not want that. Again, not for herself, not for Pride, but for her whole entire kingdom. And it was very emotional because of that desperation. I mean, the fear feels so tangible. I was so mind blown that Pride is willing to do anything and everything to keep everyone else safe. It's my number one favorite part of this manga, even though it was the number one thing that made me cry and tear up more often than not. It's amazing seeing too that I feel like, I was trying to think of an example last night. I feel like with Villainess Isekai, often the villainess will remember, or the heroine will remember her past life and have memories from that. But I feel like outside of the beginning and us finding out who Pride is and why she's in this, or how she's in this new body, there's no focus that comes back to that. Like, we don't ever see what Pride's life was as a Japanese teen in Japan. Like, we never see that. And honestly, I didn't feel it was important to know, because Pride is just a wonderful, strong young woman. I mean, she's only 8 years old and she definitely has this maturity, and people around her are like, what happened to her? And it was really interesting too, because usually, you know, when that happens, a person gets reincarnated into the villainess and they change overnight. Like, everybody's like, shocked. Like, what just happened? It's night and day kind of change. This is very true for her, but her powers come in or start to show, and it was like a natural weaving of like, wow, because Pride got these abilities and this power, she changed because of that. And I liked how that was. Another great part of this manga is the world building. I really like how the powers are not all the same. There's one power actually that a certain character is desperately after, and I will just say that with this character, I did not like him. He was my second most hated character under the old Pride, but this other character is after one thing, and I just never expected, or after this one power, excuse me, and I never expected that as the story would go on, especially in the third volume, that I would just be so touched and just not hate this character anymore. I would not say I super enjoyed his character, but the backstories are so compelling and they flow so naturally in the story. Like, it's not just like, okay, we're in present time and then boom, we're just got this whiplash of being in this flashback. No, it's a natural progression, and I felt like that through the whole series, that the story just flowed so well. I mean, you get these flashbacks and then you get these backstories and flashbacks with these other characters, and then you get Pride's flashbacks. How it all came together was absolutely incredible. And there's also some time skips that happen, but they were perfectly woven in as well. Like, it made sense given how the time needed to pass and how it just wove all together. I really loved it. I felt like you get more time skips in this one. And then with volume 2, it felt like, because when I was trying to write a review on Goodreads, I couldn't say much because volume 2, I felt like it centered more around one event, a certain event happening. And it was so action-packed. Like, the end of this volume, I was like, I need to see what's going to happen in volume 2. And then volume 3, I actually read the fastest because I was so engaged. The stakes just gradually get higher and higher, and the plot twists were so good in this third volume. Like, I do not know where this series is going to go. I'm desperately hoping that Pride and her family have a happy ending. Like, yes, I feel like the desperation is overwhelming. Like, she deserves it. She's doing so much, and the way that she takes time to genuinely get to know people and genuinely do everything she can to avoid what happens in the Otome game. Because when you see what happened in the original Otome game and who Pride was, it is so angering. It is so frustrating. And that sadness, though, that Pride feels, that she's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to make that same decision that Pride did. Like, please, I need to to change this, not for me, again, not for her well-being, but because I don't want to see the heartbreak that this character is going to go through, because the old Pride, I hated her, guys. There has never been a more compelling villainess, original villainess, than the old Pride. Oh my goodness, the wicked things that she does. Like, she is a true wicked queen, true villainous status that really just takes joy in pain of other people around her. Like, she has no kind of remorse for her actions. Oh, I hated it so much. And maybe that's why I feel like this title is so fitting, where it goes from villainous to savior, because the new Pride, you see her doing these actions to save her people. Let's go ahead and talk about the characters, because we could definitely talk about them and talk about the kingdom, but specifically when it comes to these characters, Stale and Tiara, I won't say how they're necessarily involved, but they are very close to her. I really loved the development of their relationship with one another. It was so beautiful, and so I'm like, Pride, if you could just see what you're doing right now and how much these people genuinely care for you and love you, it's gonna be okay. At least I hope and pray it's gonna be okay for these characters. That is why I need the light novel. That's why I'm interested in the light novel. But yes, Stale is a young man who comes into this family as an adopted son, more or less. I really loved seeing him develop and grow as a young man in this story. It was so amazing, especially when you see him meet another character and how their bond grows as friends and how they push one another and challenge one another. It was so great, especially in relation to Pride and how he's doing everything he can to be there for her. Tiara is a very sweet young character. I always enjoyed seeing her on page, especially how Pride loves her so very much and how Pride's motivations, I guess you would say, and her desire to be involved, it was so compelling and so very beautiful. I very, very much appreciate it and love seeing it unfold so very much. Another character I really enjoyed was Arthur. He definitely brings some nice banter and just not as polite as everybody else is. He's not afraid to say things. It was very good. I also enjoyed seeing him on page and seeing him grow, because he also had a very moving story as well. And I feel like with all of these characters, yes, you see their backstories, and not just because of, well, maybe because some of their backstories, you get really attached to all of these characters because you just see how much Pride cares for them. And I really think that how much she cares really rubs off on the reader. At least I know it did for me. And then you get the backstory and you see how things have changed. And it's so good. It's so good, guys. It's so good. There's a lot of action and there's a lot of deeper themes, because a large part of why I enjoy Villainous Isekai is because it usually is very humorous. It's enjoyable to see the villainess have to change things so she doesn't trip her own red flags. And usually they're outlandish things, like I'm the villainess, so I'm taming the final boss, or like the villainess stands the heroes. That's another really funny one. And so I think of these, and I think I came in surprised how much more mature feeling this series is. There's sadder overtone, but there's some really good humorous parts too. It's not a sad manga, but it is a deeper villainous isekai than I've seen. It was so good. It was so good. I am definitely sad that this is only 3 volumes though. Thankfully, I mean, my heart breaks for the manga artist, because her art is beautiful. The way that she is able to convey certain emotions and capture that fear where it's very tangible was just incredibly mind-blowing to me. But due to her health, she decided not to continue with the manga. But there was an announcement that this is getting not a reboot, but there's going to be a new manga artist that's going to start, I guess, at the beginning of the light novel series and go forward from there. So hopefully 7 Seas will pick it up. I wish it was just a continuation, because I'm like, I really want more of this series, just how it is. These characters are amazing. The story is so compelling and it's driving and engaging, and it makes you want to know what is going to happen to Pride. What is she going to do? Again, not for her benefit, but for her whole kingdom. And I feel that is what makes her such an amazing heroine, and where I'm like, she has to live by the end of this series. Like, she cannot die. And again, this goes back to why I want the light novels, to see what happens, because I do not want to wait for this other manga series that may or may not get printed in English and never know. Because one thing that is great, because it does end there and it does not adapt the entire light novel series, I was not extremely sad at the end of volume 3. Like, it doesn't end on this cliffhanger where you're like, oh my goodness, like I'm forever gonna wonder what happened. It does close up the arc pretty well. So I mean, obviously, you know, with some of the events within the last few pages, you know that there's definitely more, but I did feel like if I stopped here and I decided not to read the light novels, that I would be okay. definitely want more, but I still feel like that's an important thing to note so that you're not picking up the series and you're like, this is a horrible place to end, where you just know not all of the manga has been adapted in, or not all of the light novel has been adapted into this manga. So do I recommend this series? Yes. An overwhelming yes. It is so good. It's just, I never expected how emotionally impactful this series would be and how much I would love Pride in seeing her growth and development as a young woman, how attached I would get to all of these characters and enjoy the world building that we got. It was not too little and not too much. It was just right. And the twists and turns in this third volume, like, I'm not one to predict what's going to happen usually in stories, but this one kept me on the edge of my seat at all 3 volumes. It's so good. If you are a fan of Villainous Isekai, I highly recommend checking this out. I feel like this series is so underrated, and I'm like, no, it needs to be on people's radar. Don't come in expecting something fluffy and funny. I mean, yes, it has those moments, don't get me wrong, but like I said, it's a deeper Villainous Isekai with some real consequences and tangible fear that I just cannot get over. That is my manga recommendation for today. Thank you so much for listening. Totally let me know, have you read this series? Did you enjoy this series? I would love to hear your thoughts. And have you read the light novel? If you haven't read this series, do you enjoy reading Villainous Isekai or just Isekai in general? Let me know down below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. Bye!